Thanks for joining us. This is Omni View, episode 76 for June 9th, 2026. Balanced news perspectives, today's stories, multiple viewpoints, your call. A potential Iran nuclear deal in days could reopen the Strait of Hormuz and ease global oil pressure, while a U.S. Army helicopter incident near the waterway highlights ongoing risks. President Trump stated after the NBA Finals that talks with Iran are in final stages, and a very, very good deal may be completed soon. He indicated the Strait of Hormuz would reopen immediately once agreed. The comments come amid recent military exchanges in the region. Advocates maintain that rapid diplomacy rests on the shared interest in avoiding prolonged disruption to energy supplies that raises costs for households worldwide. They argue that reopening shipping lanes quickly limits inflationary pressure on food and fuel. Critics contend the emphasis on speed risks overlooking verification steps that prevented earlier violations. Both sides agree the strait remains a critical choke point. They differ on whether interim security guarantees are sufficient before full reopening. What verification measures would make any agreement durable? Shifting now to the related military incident. A U.S. Army helicopter went down in the area of the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump said the pilots are fine. The New York Times first reported the incident. Some argue prompt statements from the White House reduce speculation that could escalate tensions. Others note that limited details leave open questions about operational context and any broader pattern of incidents. How do statements from officials shape public understanding of regional security? Next, we turn to developments in the pharmaceutical sector. GSK reached an agreement to buy the drug maker Nuvalent. Nuvalent shares rose sharply after the announcement. The transaction occurs during a period of increased biotech deal activity tied to patent expirations and pipeline needs. Advocates maintain that larger firms gain access to late-stage candidates that smaller companies have developed, potentially accelerating treatments for patients. They highlight how buoyant public markets enable these transactions. Skeptics point to the concentration of development pipelines among fewer players as a possible long-term risk to innovation diversity. How do patent timelines influence when companies pursue acquisitions? Meanwhile, in economic indicators, an index tracking U.S. small business sentiment declined in May, wiping out nearly all gains recorded since the presidential election. The drop brings readings to the weakest point in roughly 7 months. Some interpret the reversal as evidence that earlier post-election gains were not sustained. Others note that single-month readings can reflect temporary factors rather than structural shifts. How do small business trends connect to broader employment data? Now to an incident reported in Northern Ireland. Police responded to a knife attack on Kinnaird Avenue in North Belfast late Monday. A man in his 30s, reported as Somali, was arrested on suspicion of attempted murder. The victim sustained serious injuries and was hospitalized. Some emphasize rapid arrests as evidence the justice system functions. Others stress the importance of context around community relations to prevent wider tensions. How do political leaders' statements shape public reaction? To understand the Hormuz situation more fully, most coverage assumes any closure immediately spikes prices worldwide. The actual mechanism involves layered responses from strategic reserves, alternative pipelines, and rerouting that can blunt short-term effects. When tensions rise, traders first price in the probability and duration of interruption rather than a total cutoff. Roughly 20% of global oil normally transits the strait, while spare capacity elsewhere and government stockpiles provide buffers. Knowing this, when you hear claims of an instant crisis, you can check whether reports account for these offsets or treat the strait as an on-off switch. Next time you see a headline about Hormuz, ask which alternative supply routes are already quantified, how large are current reserve releases, and what historical precedent exists for rapid rerouting during past tensions. Turning to energy markets in the Gulf region, Kuwait resumed offering oil sales to Asian refiners, the first such move since the Iran conflict started. The step signals gradual reopening of supply routes despite earlier threats to shipping. Some see the move as evidence that alternative channels can mitigate disruption. Others note that sustained flows still depend on security conditions in key waterways. Which buyers are receiving the new offers and why? In trade data from Asia and Europe, Chinese purchases from the European Union fell for the first time in 3 months. The decline increased an existing trade gap that has already drawn regulatory scrutiny from the bloc. Some argue the pattern reflects domestic demand weakness in China. Others highlight the role of regulatory and subsidy differences in shaping trade flows. What policy tools are available to address persistent gaps? Before we go, watch for opening matches of the FIFA World Cup and whether viewership records materialize in the United States. That wraps up today's Omni View. Remember, the best informed people read more than one perspective. If this show helps you do that, share it with someone who values fair coverage. See you tomorrow. And before you go, this show is part of the NARA Network, a family of daily podcasts covering tech, science, markets, and more. If you enjoyed today's episode, give Fascinating Frontiers a listen. The most fascinating news from space and science. You can explore the whole lineup at naranetwork.com. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.